good. Probably need to flip on my computer. There we go. Cool. Hi, everybody. Nice to see everyone come out to Web Unleashed. This is one of my favorite events of the year because there's so many nerds in the same spot, and it's great. There's like lots of spontaneous interaction that happens, and like there's really cool talks that gives. So I'm going to be talking about a few like different tools and stuff like that. The slides are up at robynlarsen.ca/speaking/remote. So don't worry about like links and stuff like that because I got a lot of questions about that last time I gave this talk. Oh, I have a thing. So I recently moved to Revelstoke, which is this like really teeny tiny town in the middle of BC. It is awesome. I get to do all the fun mountain biking, climbing, all the like adventure, adrenaline junkie things that I like to do outside of work. In my spare time, I work on something called Zona Fitness Academy. It's just an online e-learning platform for fitness trainers. I also work with this amazing, fully distributed team as a front-end developer with Fuse. We're hiring, so if you guys are looking at getting into remote work or kind of interested in it, we're looking for a full-stack dev. How many of you guys are familiar with this life? Sitting in traffic, commuting, hating and feeling a little bit like this? Oh no, I missed it. So before I dive into some of the like remote work talking stuff, I am going to start with the story of where all of this came about. And for me, it was the commuter lifestyle. I was commuting 3 hours and 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That's a lot of time on a train or on a bus or on a streetcar or whatever. And that was like best case scenario, that all of the things lined up and you caught your streetcar and you caught your next bus and you caught your train and you caught like everything. And then you want to rip your hair out because you're like, I am not working out. I don't get to spend any time with my family or my friends. And you're like kind of feeling a little bit like this guy in the wheels. And so all of this came about of how do I find a way to get out of that space? How do I create the room and find a way to essentially manipulate time? A lot of people have this dream of sipping Mai Tais on the beach and doing nothing, and that's like what their essential dream is. For me, work and play are one and the same, and so I don't know about you guys, but web development is really fucking cool, and you feel like you've won the career lottery by doing design or working with tech or essentially creating something from nothing. And so then I started asking the question of like, why do we work 9 to 5? And 9 to 5 came about from the, there's a labor act that came about in like 1938 in order to kind of take into account all of these really harsh working conditions that people were going through. So they were working 8 hours a week, weren't super safe. And so the 40-hour work week came about. But now we've moved into this new day and age where we don't necessarily have to work in that type of environment any longer. And so you can start asking the question of like, is 9 to 5 the best for your productivity? And then we start going into the next level of what that looks like. So a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to hack my productivity and figure out like, when do you work best? When do you work in your most efficient time? When are you going to get the most work done? When are you doing that? And a lot of that came about from with trying to understand like how do you change your day-to-day activities. And when people think about hacking, they think about anonymous. They think about some developer dude in his pajamas sitting in the basement with nothing but his computer and this like really dark screen in the dark. That's what they think about. When I think about hacking, I think about trying to find the most efficient way to get from A to Z. And I really liked this MIT definition of hacking. And hacking is essentially, it's like the art of engaging in activity in order to go through an exploration process of like playfulness. And you don't necessarily need to use programming as that medium. And I know that a lot of people, when they think about hacking, they think about computer hackers. I mean, obviously everybody talks about hacking and like how do you make everything a little bit more efficient. And so then this led to how do you create the integrated state? For me, the integrated state is around lifestyle design and biohacking and what does that look like? And so for me, the ideal year is spending time with my family and flying and seeing people in Toronto. I live in this really tiny mountain town in Revelstoke, so now I'm like trying to figure out if you can actually live in a really small mountain town and still have a lot of that spontaneous interaction that comes along with coming to these conferences, and still finding a way to pull in and travel throughout the year. So one of the other things that comes from this is, how do you reach the state of flow? And so flow for me, and for a lot of people in the creative space, is essentially losing track of time while you're doing a task. How many of you guys have ever had that moment? How many of you guys hit that moment every single day? Once a week? Yeah? A couple times a month? Okay, all right. So reaching flow is my daily goal. And I have found a way to hack flow for myself. So I hit flow on a daily basis through work. I hit flow on a daily basis through the activities that I do outside of it, like physical fitness, whatever that might look like, whether it's mountain biking or rock climbing or snowboarding or going to the gym or whatever that might be. That really, if you have a way to, not artificially, but create a catalyst that'll force you to hit that state, then you're always going to essentially be enjoying life in that state or in some form of it. And so part of that hacking process came around with my daily routine. So a lot of people that I talk to that go to the gym, they'll go in the morning, or they'll go in after work, or they'll go in the middle of the day, or they'll like do something a little bit different. And so through that hacking process, I was able to essentially artificially create this trigger to hit flow on a daily basis. So now, some of the weird things that come in there is having a nap and coding at 6 a.m. How many people do you know, how many programmers do you know that actually code at 6 in the morning? Almost none. It's like the craziest thing. I know 2 people that code at 6 a.m. So my general schedule is 6 a.m. wake up, coffee, eggs, and I'm coding from usually 6:30 until 11. And that like moment that I dive into coding, I will hit flow within 10 to 15 minutes because it's part of the daily discipline that I've created around remote life. And then I will take and I go to the gym, I'll go mountain biking, and then I come back, have lunch, and a nap. And I know that sounds really crazy, but how many of you guys experienced that post-lunch food coma? You want to die and like fall over and you're like barely keeping your eyes open and you are not really enjoying work very much at that point in time. You're like, I just need a fucking nap just for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it'll be great. I do that every single day. So when I don't get my nap now, I'm really tired in the afternoon. It's like not working super well. The other thing that is a part of that daily routine is having meetings in the afternoon. So how many of you guys have heard of the Maker Schedule before from Paul Graham? So the Maker Schedule is essentially based around allowing everybody in the morning to just focus on their product deliverables, whether that's coding or designing or shipping assets, and then moving all of the meetings or like people interactions into the afternoon, because I find that a lot of people, in order to get into flow, in order to like push through a lot of content or push through a lot of work throughout the day, they need to have like a good chunk of time. How do you do that when you're constantly being interrupted by meetings every single hour? Like if it takes you up to 30 minutes to hit flow, then you only actually have 30 minutes before you have to dive into a meeting. And then if that continues throughout the day, how much work do you actually get done? And so those are some of the things that I think about when you're talking about trying to hack your productivity and pull in remote working and pull in that lifestyle. And so when I talk about remote working, a lot of people come up to me and say, yeah, but Robyn, I'm not a developer. Like, I can't take a nap in the middle of the day. Like, that's not a part of what I can have access to. I can't just shut off completely. I can't walk away from my computer because I'm not a developer. But I really believe that it doesn't matter what role you're doing, whether you're having client interactions or meetings or leadership in any form, you can still find a way to create that lifestyle and create the hacking around remote living and remote working. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the remote life and what that looks like and how to kind of integrate that within your team. And so I'll preface this by saying that this talk is not about whether remote working is good or bad. This talk is about finding a way to see if this is a good fit for your organization. And so, again, a lot of this came about because of the commuting that I was doing. And for me, one of my previous partners, he was in emergency services. And so I would see him once a month with that 5 days a week, 3-hour, 20-minute commute. And that is like really terrible for family life. That's really terrible for relationships. It's just like not a thing. And so I would approach each of the companies that I worked with and said, hey, can I work from home 1 day a week? Can we find a way to like work that in? And a part of that conversation was from like an experimental perspective so that I could see if A, it was possible, B, it would allow me to take a break from commuting, because that's just like not something that I really enjoyed doing. I don't know if you guys find like a really good way to use that time. I powered through so many Audible books when I was doing that. So that's, if you don't know about Audible, that's my favorite app when I was doing that a lot. So again, I'm going to talk about like some of the ground rules around how to integrate this. So this is primarily for managers and employees who want to shift towards a remote working model. This is not the be-all, end-all. I don't have all the answers and like the secret sauce about like what is the best approach to be doing this. Again, also realize that like remote working might not be good for you as an individual, right? And that's okay. You can try it, you might hate it, and it might not be good for you, and it might not be good for your productivity, and maybe you're not very good because you don't know how to turn off going and doing laundry in the middle of the day. But it's still something that you can take and try and experiment, and like knowing and having enough self-awareness around whether remote working is going to be a good part of your lifestyle. That's also another question to be able to answer. And again, it might not be a right fit for every company and the culture that they have tried to create or continue to shift towards with it. And then, again, it's not about the good or the bad. It's about finding a way to experiment and like test the potential of what remote working can actually look like. There's a lot of benefits, obviously. There's a lot of like negativities, but there's, again, just a lot of trade-offs around remote working and what that looks like. So I found this through Google. 25% of all US companies now have some form of remote working policy, that's a huge number. So if like organizations aren't getting on board with that in some shape or another, you have the opportunity to go and find other places that can do that. So now I'm going to talk about a few case studies in real life, what that looks like, and the different experiences that I had. There's 3 case studies that I'm going to talk about. So the first one was with a company that I used to work for a few years ago. They were the first organization that I had worked with around trying to find a way if remote working was a thing. So again, this was part of the job negotiation that I had. So if you're moving into an organization and you're trying to figure out if you want to, they don't really have a remote working policy and it's something that you want to test, then this is one of the ways, this is like one of the times to be doing it, is you can take and negotiate with your employer around doing 1 day a week. And some of the arguments that come around that is creating a double standard within the organization. But what do you mean? You're the only one that's going to be remote working. That is like not fair to the rest of the team, except if you approach it from the point of experimentation, then they're more likely to move in and like give you access to that type of working style, because it could essentially benefit the entire organization, the entire team. And so it doesn't actually create a double standard. It creates that open opportunity to shape the conversation with your manager or your employer or whatever that looks like. Again, this is also from like a leadership perspective. Like there's a lot of things that are kind of really tough to figure out. So if I can't see them working, how do I know that they're working? How do I know that they're actually getting their work done? Like people have this really amazing ability to live down to the expectations that you set for them. And so when you are going into this type of experimentation process as an employee, as an individual, your job is to be insanely over-communicative, to go above and beyond. Like this will probably take you way more fucking work to get into that remote working environment and to create those opportunities for the rest of your team initially. It won't always be like that, but keep that in mind when you're actually like going down this road or going down this process of like, you might have to do more work. You might have to engage a lot more with your team. And so the first experience that I had was around working 1 day a week. 1 day a week turned into 6 weeks in Alberta. 1 day a week turned into an entire opportunity for most of the team to be able to start working remotely a few times of the day. So a lot of organizations have really flexible policies around if you have appointments and doctor's appointments and stuff like that, and that's like a really good way to test it and to kind of push the envelope a little bit. But for companies that are really not sure and really don't give ownership to their team, like, it doesn't really matter what you do. If they don't believe that you're actually going to get the work that you say that you're going to do, then it's pretty unlikely that the trust is in the organization for you to be able to access that. And so those are like some of the things to think about when you are approaching this type of conversation. So the next company that I did this with was TWG, and they are a really great product design and development studio that's based in Toronto. They're also hiring, so if you guys are looking for like another cool company to go work for, these guys are great. So when I approached, when I had like started with TWG, this was very much around that experimental process. And so one of the things with TWG was we started with me. We started with me as an individual. It was a 3-month trial period where we experimented to see if working remotely would remove any form of productivity within the team, if I was unable to communicate with the team, if the team ran into any challenges, right? Like, it was all about the greater good of, will this work for the organization? How can we make this work? What can we try? And they were like really, really supportive and very progressive and understood where I was coming from in regards to spending time with my family. And so now, after 3 months, then it moved to giving this opportunity to the entire team of like 40 to 50 people. I think it was like 60 people when I was there. It went to having 2 days per month. You could pick any 2 days per month that you worked from home. That was like another gentle step into the next direction of remote working. And now today, at 100 people, they have 8 full-time remote employees that range from business development, engineering, design, some project management as well, and everybody in the organization can work 1 day a week from home. That is incredible. That's after, I think that was after about 18 months that happened. So it was like a really long process, but the opportunities to create that within your organization are there, and that, again, comes from giving ownership to the employees and like working your ass off and over communicating what is happening and finding a way to experiment with it within your company. So it's possible to take and make that shift. Some of the challenges now that they're facing are finding a way to pull leadership up. So if you have the majority of the team in a physical space, how do you create leaders in these remote workers? How do you create more opportunity other than being an individual contributor within the organization? Like, how do you move up to that next step? So these are like some of the questions that I'm trying to ponder as well, because it's really easy to move people up in a leadership position if you are, oh no, that's not good. Oops. It's really easy to move people up when you have a culture based around remote working and 100% based remote team. So again, I had talked about like where this had kind of led. Now, the next case study that I'm going to talk about is with Fuse. So Fuse is a fully distributed team. We have 13 people ranging from Africa to Seattle with time zones. So that's a pretty diverse group of people. People always ask about some of the communication challenges. We don't really run into communication challenges. With TWG, we have a ton of tools available to us for communication. So this is probably one of the biggest keystones to how to find a way to make remote working within different organizations and to trial it. We have, I don't know if you guys can read that. So we have like a standardized set of statuses that we create within our Slack channel. How many of you guys use Slack? Okay, so lots of people. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Slack, it is an instant messaging tool in the desktop that we use. It's kind of like HipChat. It's kind of like Skype. But they have this ability, they give you this ability to make and like define what your status is going to be. You can have it as like emoji of some kind, but we standardized it. So if you're away, you're away, if you're like, you can have notes of like, be right back, but we have these like standardized emojis that we use to communicate without actually having to like ping the person. So if they're not answering right away, like we know that they're doing something, we know that they're in a meeting, or we know that they're in focus mode, or we know that like, these are some of the things that we've found a way to do to create that standardized approach. And so this has been really, really helpful. We just recently shifted towards this type of, sorry, I just saw somebody. We just moved towards a standard way of like communicating within Slack because it makes it really easy and really useful. Again, having communication out in the open. So one of the other things that we do when we set up a project is have a private project Slack channel. We also have a client Slack channel. So we invite all of our clients into Slack in order to create that open dynamic and that open communication, because that's usually a concern. When we are bidding on projects or we're talking about having people be a part of this, how do we communicate what it is that we're up to? How do we give them status updates without actually having a conversation or going over the phone, or if they have questions, or if they're like, we're presenting work or something like that? So we use Slack completely out in the open. Everything, all of our communication back and forth via the devs, via the designers, with the project managers, like all of that is in our private project Slack channel. We also have for the client Slack channel, if we have questions that we want answered right away, our clients are generally really, really engaged on that side, and they really appreciate it. One of the other things that also happens out in the open within Slack, so we use this tool called Gel, J-E-L-L. It is our stand-up tool. So every single day when I'm starting work, I will write out what it is that I'm planning on doing the day. This is integrated within Slack, and all of that information gets pushed into our client Slack channel so that our clients see exactly what it is that we're working on. We also have Trello integrated into that, so we set priorities for the week, and we talk about if we have like specific questions around what's going on, very similar to Jira or Asana, some of the other project management tools that are available. So again, out in the open, we ran into a very interesting problem where we had one particular internal project where we were communicating via DMs in Slack, and it actually created a lot of problems and challenges that we had never experienced before because we weren't actually following our own process for this internal project. And our project manager, the way that she stays on top of what's going on and has a high-level overview is again through that private project Slack channel. Because everything that we talk about goes in there. Again, over communication. So I'm going to continue iterating on communication because this is the be-all, end-all. If you have a really hard time communicating with your team, if you're like not really sure about what's going on, like if people are not engaged in communicating with one another, like it's never going to work. Remote working is like not something that you'll be able to integrate into your team at all. So again, creating a culture around good communication is one of the biggest keys. Got it? Yeah? Okay. One of the other things that I find that also brings a lot of engagement into organizations, especially around remote working, is if they're a part of something larger. So most of us have the benefit of really enjoying our day-to-day work. We really believe in the type of work that we're shipping. We really believe in the projects that we're working on and the people that we're doing and helping. And so having that motivation come from a deeper mindset and like being a part of something bigger is like another way that remote working is really successful. So a lot of companies that are less optimistic about remote working always talk about the water cooler, the hallway conversations, the day-to-day interaction of like creating that spontaneous interaction. So how do you actually create that? One of the other things that comes on the other side of that mix of like, how many of you guys get interrupted a lot when you're like headphones on and you're like, I just want to get some fucking work done and I don't want to have to talk to anybody, but you still get interrupted all the time because people have questions, because you're available, because you're there, because they can see you. How do you move on beyond that? Well, with Slack is like our only form really of communication tool. And so because of that, you have the ability to control your social interactions. So Slack for an introvert is a really amazing medium. So you can watch somebody that is not very comfortable having face-to-face interactions come alive in this different medium and have crazy jokes and just be this very witty individual. in a different medium like that because they have access to something that doesn't make them as nervous to create that physical space-to-face. Like maybe they might not enjoy doing it, but this is like another form that gives them access to that type of communication. One of the other things that we also do, because team culture is really important. How do you shape that culture? How do you create it? We have weekly team meetings, literally every single week for 1 hour. We don't talk about anything work-related. In this 1 hour, we have video chat on, so we all dive into this, all 13 of us dive into this Slack video call, and we talk about how our weekend was, we talk about like cool stuff that we're learning about, we talk about whatever vacation that we're going on. Like we have that's essentially like our Friday beer afternoon demo day style hour every single week, and it's pretty successful to create that like interaction. One of the other things that we're now starting to do is, have you guys ever heard of Donut? So Donut is a Slack integration tool that randomizes weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings or however often that you want to set it up, where you have the chance to meet somebody that you haven't actually met. And so you have to like schedule a 30-minute call or an hour call randomly, but like it just randomly generates who you should meet up with every couple of weeks so that you can take and meet the rest of the team. So for larger organizations, this is a really powerful tool to get to know other people in like different departments that you wouldn't normally interact with. So moving into 100% remote working, cultivating that spontaneous interaction. So when I talk about conferences, when I talk about workshops, when you're talking about demo days, creating that spontaneous interaction or that magic that comes from working in a physical space with someone and like feeding off of their energy. Have you guys ever had those moments where you're like working through a project and you're like working on this crazy animation and you're just like, oh, but if we could do this and this and this and this and this, and like the energy just gets so crazy. How do you integrate that within remote life? How do you do that? It's like really tough. So that was a question that I always had before, and I found now it's really easy to do because you can get on a call with someone, you can have a whiteboard moment, you can have an envision board, you can do all of that stuff virtually, and you do have to be a little bit more intentional about the way that you are going about this process, and force yourself to go to conferences or force yourself to go to meetups. One of the rules that I have when I go to meetups is I go by myself and I have to meet at least 3 new people at every single event that I ever go to. And that creates that spontaneous interaction. And the other thing that comes on top of that is asking someone, what are you excited about this year? Not what do you do, what are you excited about this year? Because you don't know, but maybe yesterday they got laid off on their job and they're really embarrassed about it and they don't really want to talk about it. And so creating those spontaneous interactions through like physical space is like another way that you can take and manage that. So again, this is part of that like magic versus work stuff. And so we also, one of the things that's like really cool is once you start to ration the amount of in-person time that you create, it starts to become this little like treat, right? So we have a yearly retreat that we do with Fuse where all of us take and live in this Airbnb for a week and we hack on a project. And it is one of the coolest experiences that I've ever had because, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have gone to hackathons before, but it's a pretty amazing experience and it's like very interesting, the amount of chaos that comes from it. But creativity loves constraints, and so you come up with these really amazing products in a short amount of time, but you feed off of people's energy and you just keep building upon one another as you move forward. So again, experimenting with remote life and very much viewing this when you're moving into organizations or you're like trying to propose these types of new policies around how do you integrate that. And having it from an experimental mindset is how you start to approach these types of conversations and make it an open conversation instead of a closed-minded conversation of like being a selfish individual of like, oh, I just want this. How do you make it about the greater good of the organization and like being able to open up the doors to pull in new talent. And so I'm going to like skip through some of this stuff. So one of the other things that comes along with remote working is discipline and like personal commitment. So how many of you guys have worked, most of you have worked from home before. How many of you guys have gotten like kind of distracted because you decided that you wanted to do your laundry and like went off and did your laundry in the middle of the day? So this is like one of the best examples that I have because normally I would never Normally if I was wanting to go and do this, I would go and do that. But now with remote working, like, you have to be very intentional about not doing that. You have to be semi-disciplined to not go and get distracted, because you can always get up like every 5 minutes to go get something to eat. You can go to your kitchen, you can do your dishes, you can like make your bed, you can do whatever it is that you need to do in the middle of the day. But really, like, if you don't go into remote working with the mindset of, like being in your own office, whether that's setting up like a physical space where you close the door and like that's the trigger, whether you have to get up and like go for a walk around the block and then you come back and you're like in that mode of, hey, it's work time. You kind of gotta hack yourself in that sense to try and find a way to make it work for you. And again, this is like part of the distraction of like, this is literally the thing that most employers are really scared about when you talk about remote working. How do I know that they're actually going to get any work done? And that also goes into like setting boundaries for yourself, for your family. How many of you guys are in the middle of like coding or working on a project or something, and your spouse comes along with the latest internet meme and is like, hey, you need to friggin' look at this. This is so cool. Or your kids are like, Mom, but like I need this thing now. Right? Like setting boundaries is really hard when you have all these different distractions. And so like doing laundry, that's an easy one. Having kids, like that's another one. I have a friend of mine, they have a nanny come in or a babysitter come in on a daily basis because he works from home every single day. But he goes down in the basement. He goes into a separate room. And so the kids know that when he goes into this room and shuts the door, like, you can't bother him. Like, that's not a thing. And they also bring in somebody to help take care of the kids during the day. But just because you're working from home doesn't mean that you can do two jobs at the same time. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't, but it's like some of the things that come into account when you're talking about remote working. And so I very much have I have two rules. I have, if my code mode sign is on, if my door is shut, and if my headphones are on, like, off. Like, I am busy, don't bother me, I am in the zone. Like, it's not going to happen. Headphones are like kind of a little bit different because I feel like I go into this like pilot mode of like heads down and like you're just in that moment and like everything else disappears. So a good pair of noise canceling headphones is key for really good remote working. But this sign is from Jessica Hish. She's amazing. So if you guys are looking for a sweet ass code mode light, that's where you can get it. You can Google it. It'll come up. Okay, so let's talk about like the non-discipline. And what about on those days when you're like, oh, I don't really feel like working? You can get up, you can go for a walk around the block, you come back, you're like, I still don't really feel like working. Take the rest of the day off. Weird. I would rather be 10 times productive during the time that I'm supposed to be working than sitting there and clocking hours just because I'm clocking hours. Like, that's not very useful for anybody. That's a really hard thing to sell to employers unless it's a part of the culture. And I know that's really, really weird. And that just is like, what do you mean you stopped working on like a 10 a.m. on a Friday? It means you're just taking another long weekend. No. So I have these days where I can't get in the code, I'm not getting into the groove, I can go for a walk, I can go to the gym, I can come back, and I'm like still not feeling like I'm getting anything done. It's okay. Go take the day off, because tomorrow you will be 10 times more productive, whether that's Saturday or Sunday or a Monday or whatever. Like, at Fuse, we have a flexible 30-hour work week. They don't care when you get your work done. As long as you get your work done, you're meeting your client deadlines, and you are taking in, like, contributing successfully into the team, like, it shouldn't matter when you're getting your work done. That's a hard sell for a lot of companies, organizations. So, again, with this remote working thing, one of the biggest challenges that I ran into was, like, being all by myself in this room and getting lonely and, like, not having my peers to talk to in a physical space. Like, the one thing that I miss most is Friday beer day demos at 4 p.m. every single week. That is the one thing that I miss. And although we have the weekly team hangout on Slack, and we have movie nights together and we do all that stuff, that is the one thing that I miss of, like, having people in the same room together. Sometimes it's a little bit challenging. I'm going to, like, go through all this stuff really quickly now because I'm running out of time. So talent. So one of the other things that's really amazing about remote working is you can take and build up this community of individuals, and you can take and pick and choose where it is that you want to go. The type of people that you want to be pulling into this, and you can be very selective about it. And you have access to this like giant planet where people live all over the world. So now you can take and pick the people that you want, the people that you need based on the talent that they can actually provide, and you can hire the best people. So then it's also a lot about like the personal and professional growth of like injecting that type of mentality into your people and like growing them within the organization. The other thing that is really, really important around hiring is getting the right people on the bus, right? Again, I had said remote working is not for everybody. Remote working might not be that thing, but in any organization, hiring the right people, at Fuse, we hire really, really slow. Because if they don't fit within the team, we're going to be so much worse off if we hire the wrong person and need to let them go later, because it creates this weird anxiety around hiring or firing people really quickly. And a lot of organizations have experienced this before. So now I'm going to like run through all the tools really quickly, and then I will give you 5 minutes for questions, because otherwise we're not going to have time for any. So I talked about Slack already. We use Gmail. Zeppelin is a really big tool that we use. So it integrates with Sketch. How many of you guys use Sketch? How many of you guys use Zeppelin? So Zeppelin is like a developer's dream tool. It gives you the spacing, it gives you the fonts, it gives you like all of the color variables that you need. It gives you almost everything that you want from like UI stance. GitHub, Bitbucket. We use Gel, which is this like weird little green dot thing for our daily stand-ups. We also use Donut. We use Trello for our project management tool system, so our clients get access to Trello as well. So if they have questions or we're running into problems, that's like how we find a way to make this work. Screen Hero was amazing. So when with the first company that I'd worked for, I was still a junior developer. I was actually a baby developer is what I call it, because when you come out of a boot camp, you are a baby developer. You are not a junior developer, you are a baby developer. You haven't been developing for like 5 or 6 years pre-university and then 5 or 6 years during university, so you are a baby. Screen Hero was amazing because I could do pair programming sessions with my senior dev team when I was running into all these crazy challenges and like didn't really understand what was going on. They were bought out by Slack, so I don't know if you can actually get an account, and I'm really sorry, but it's coming, I'm assuming, to Slack eventually. And if you come bug me, I will send you a user sign up thing, because you can, if you already have Screen Hero, you can invite more people to Screen Hero. It's awesome. Sketch. Harvest is how we track our time. How we track our time with our tasks. And so Harvest has a Trello integration tool. So when I make a card in Trello, I can take and go and click on the Harvest integration piece, and it will link up to Harvest and start tracking time based on that card that I'm working on. And like some people, there's like time tracking conversations that we can have later, but that is one of the ways that we can, again, communicate with our clients what it is that we're working on, where are we spending our time. InVision is where we use most of our wireframing and stuff, and you can create a lot of interactions. How many of you guys have heard of InVision? Okay, most of you guys know. It's all good. Dropbox is how we share all of our files. Google Drive is where we share our docs, so our company policies. If we're doing project proposals for clients, this is where that goes. Dropbox is like where all of our working files are. And then we use Forecast, which also integrates within Harvest. And Forecast is essentially a forecasting tool for everybody in our team. Where is their time getting spent? And how are we going to take and manage projects or like client work moving forward, so that we make sure that people aren't getting overloaded with more than 30 hours a week or underloaded. Skipping all the things. So I only have 5 minutes left. So go connect with the world's genius and redefine the way that you work, live, and play. Thank you. Sorry. So I only have 5 minutes for questions, not even, maybe 3. Does anybody have any questions? Guy in the red shirt, and then Jess.
Do you have any experience? So you said you have a 30-hour work week right now. I know there are some companies that are experimenting with reduced work hours. So instead of a 40-hour week, like 8 hours a day, you would put in 5 hours a day.
So the question was, actually, can you repeat the actual question? There was a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah, so experimenting with a reduced hourly work week. So instead of working 40 hours a week, and you might go into the office, you might spend 5 hours.
So the question is, what is a reduced hourly, weekly hourly rate? Yeah. Sorry, what is a reduced weekly hourly?
Just working instead of working 8
Thank you.
hours a day.
So if you're not working 8 hours a day and you're working 5 hours a week, what is that like? For me, it's great. I find that I'm not going to get more than 6 hours of really concentrated work done at any given point in time. Even when you look at a physical remote, or a physical office space, it's kind of expected that your employees aren't going to put in a full 8 hours of work. I actually find that I'm way more productive at home, and I output way more code from a medium of this is what I have to deliver to my organization. I do way more work and I get way more done working remotely from home than I ever did in an organization. But part of that is from that maker schedule thing that I talk about, of having those big chunks of time associated with it. So what is it like? I get paid a salary for the entire year. So we are on a reduced hourly, a reduced rate. So I'm making 75% of what I would normally make in an organization, but the hourly rate of that is the same. I'm doing 30 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. Yeah. Jess?
Yeah, what do you do with the other hours? Do you do freelance work?
So the question is, what do I do with the other hours? I do some freelance work still, and that is encouraged at Fuse. That might not be encouraged at different companies that you're at. But the reason why that's encouraged is because it builds other skills, right? Some of the skills that I'm trying to learn how to build right now are business development or design skills, or trying to learn that new tool. That's all a part of it. I also sometimes I'll take 3 hours in the middle of the day. I'll go biking, mountain biking for 2 hours, and then come back and shower and eat and get back into work. For me, it's a really amazing thing because I get 2 incredible chunks of time that are super productive because I'm very alert. So the morning time is where I do my best work, and in the afternoon I also have that same amount of productivity because I take a pretty big break in the middle. Yeah. Any other questions? So, that's a good one. How do I balance out communicating and getting into flow with the morning or the afternoon? So I don't necessarily think that you can get into flow and still be working with, still communicating a lot. I know that I'm going to be less productive in the afternoon because I know that I'm going to be doing a lot of communication back and forth with my team, and that's just part of the mix. But I've been pretty intentional about making sure that I get a really good chunk of time, or a really good chunk of work done in the morning, and then leave the afternoon and know that it's not going to necessarily be as productive. But I know that that's a part of my working day, and it's also very dependent week by week, right? I usually try to bunch all my meetings together where they're only on Wednesdays or Thursday afternoons, and that's just something that I've found to try and integrate. I still make a lot of flexibility. So let's say a client can only meet on a Tuesday morning. I'm not going to say no, but if I have a choice, that's how I try to schedule and work my day so that I have my most productive chunks of time and kind of protect that. Apparently I have no more room. So if you guys have more questions, thank you so much for coming out. Again, if you have any questions about tools and stuff like that, feel free to tweet at me. Thank you.